Hello and welcome to Codex Lee. My name is Lee and this is a channel all about books. If you've watched any of the previous videos on my channel, then you know that I like books. That's what this channel is about. But a particular type of book that I enjoy reading, as you will have seen from the title of this video, is a book about books. And today I wanted to talk about some specific books about books, many of which I haven't read yet. These are in my TBR, but I wanted to share them with you because I think these types of books are fascinating. There's sort of three categories of books about books I'm going to talk about in this video. But before I get started with those, there's one particular author I wanted to talk about who is a fellow booktuber, Jen Campbell. And Jen has actually written a number of different books about books, or rather books about bookstores and her experiences in bookstores. I confess I haven't read any of them, but I'm really keen to read them. And some of Jen's books include the Bookshop book, Weird Things Customers Say in Bookshops, More Weird Things Customers Say in Bookshops, Franklin's Flying Bookshop, and many more. I really recommend that you check out Jen's Goodread page, and I'll put a link to that down below, as well as Jen's booktube channel, and I'll put the card up here for that, and it's also down in the description box. If you can hear that noise, that's the sound of my cat drinking. Sorry. Okay, so the next book I want to talk about, in fact the next three books I'm going to talk about are books about books that I've read. And all three of these are, I think, related in the sense that they're all about the experience of reading. So they're about readers and readers' experiences. And this is the fascinating thing about books. They come in all different sort of varieties. They all have different focuses, different themes. So, Racing Odysseus, this is written by Roger H. Martin, and it came out in 2008. And the reason I read this book was because at the time I was really fascinated by liberal arts education, sort of like great books courses, where, you know, you start with reading Homer, for example, and you work your way through the Greek and Roman classics and so on. I think this particular type of syllabus, if you like, has really fallen out of fashion in recent years, particularly with, you know, the greater emphasis on non-Western authors and the sort of rejection of the kind of the great white man canon, if you like. But I still think it's fascinating. There's still an important body of work that was written by white men, and they're still very much worth reading. Obviously, there's a lot more to read beyond that. But anyway, I was fascinated by that, and there's a particular college in the US, St. John's College, that does this, that teaches this course of kind of going through the great books. And I think you can see their syllabus on their website if you're interested to see what those books are. And this college professor, Roger Martin, he survived cancer, and he decided he wanted to take, I think it was a year out, to go back to college. So as a college professor going back to college, he went to St. John's and he did this course on the great books. And then he wrote a book about it, Racing Odysseus. The reason it's called Racing Odysseus is because one of the books he reads is the Odyssey, and he joins the rowing team. I think I sort of would give this book around a 3-star, particularly if you're interested in books about books. He probably talks as much, if not more, about his experiences in the rowing team as he does about reading these books. This also brings to mind the fact that one of the things I really enjoy is looking at what's the plural of syllabus? Syllabi? Looking at syllabi, reading lists, compiling reading lists. I like compiling my own reading lists. I have Zotero, which is the kind of bibliographic management tool, and I like making lists of books I want to read. Does anybody else who watches this channel enjoy doing that, or is that just something that I do that's kind of weird? Maybe it's just me. So the next book about a reader's experience that I want to talk about is Reading the World, Confessions of a Literary Explorer by Anne Morgan. This came out in 2015. I read it fairly recently, I think maybe the year before last. So Anne Morgan, she was really inspired by the opening ceremony of the 2012 Olympics in London. This idea of this kind of great multicultural nation, and also this idea of all these people from around the world coming together in this one multicultural city. She found that really inspiring, and she became conscious of the fact that lots of the books she was reading were written by people whose first language is English. A lot of books, a lot of British books, a lot of American books, and she really wanted to diversify her reading. So she set herself a challenge of reading, over the course of a year, one book from each of the world's 196 countries. which she did. She managed to do that. I went into this book expecting it to be about the books that she read, and it is to some extent, but again, like Racing with Odysseus, it's about more than that. It's about her reflections on how difficult it was to find some of these books. So during the time she was running this project, there was a newly created country that emerged either during the course of this year or very shortly before, that being South Sudan. So trying to find literature specifically from South Sudan proved to be really challenging, but she talks about the experience of doing that. She talks about how few books from certain countries are translated into English, so the difficulty with sourcing translated books. She talks about the complexities around how do you define what a country actually is. Anyway, this is an interesting book for all sorts of reasons, not just because of the specific books that she read, but of the experience of trying to find these books and contemplating the complexities of nationhood and translation and all the rest of it. It's really fascinating. I really enjoyed this book. And the final book from the first category I'm going to talk about of readers is the one that I probably enjoyed most out of these first three. And this is a book called The Year of Reading Dangerously, How 50 Great Books and 2 Not So Great Ones Changed My Life by Andy Miller. Again, I really enjoyed this. There's much more focus on the books themselves here. He actually does a very close literary analysis, a comparison of the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown and Moby Dick by Herman Melville. And you wouldn't really think those books go together, but he makes a case for why there's actually many comparisons between them. So Andy Miller, I think he works in a publishing house. He reads books as part of his job, but he realized that he wasn't reading many books outside of his job for pleasure. So this challenge was to kind of rekindle his passion for reading, as opposed to reading for work, which is what he spent most of his reading time doing. Andy Miller also inspired me to do a project nearly a couple of years ago now. You can watch the video about it up here, where I read or attempted to read all of Shakespeare's works in the space of 1 week. Spoiler, I didn't quite manage that, although I gave it a good effort. And also just reading Andy's book inspired me to do more reading myself. And he makes the case for reading doesn't always have to be for pleasure, which is a strange case to make. I think the very much in vogue line is, you shouldn't read a book unless you're really enjoying it. And there's a lot of merit to that argument. If you're really not enjoying something, then yes, life is too short to read the whole thing. But I think there's also a case to be made for persevering sometimes and coming away with some experience of reading that isn't necessarily entertainment. If we only read things that entertain us, then we miss out on a lot of experiences, and particularly many learning experiences that might be very valuable. Okay, on to the next category of books about books, and these books are about either the destruction of books or the salvation of books. So this is more about, I guess, the book as an object and the preservation of the book, or the loss of the book, essentially. So the first book from this category is the one that was published most recently from all the books I'm going to talk about today. And that's this book. It's called Burning the Books by Richard Ovenden. And it's got a wonderful, wonderful cover, as you can see. It goes right away around to the back. So this is a beautiful book. Now, Richard Ovenden, the author, is actually, I'm not sure what his exact job title is, but he is essentially the chief librarian at the Bodleian in Oxford, which is a wonderful library that I really wish that I had visited when I lived in the UK. It's a very old library. It goes back very many hundreds of years, has some very rare material there. So this is a person who's very familiar with and appreciative of old, rare books and of knowledge more broadly. But in this book, he's chronicling instances where great books have been lost. And not just books in terms of the Codex book, but of papyrus, clay tablets, all kinds of, I suppose, ways of storing knowledge and how that has been lost. And sometimes that loss might be accidental. The Great Library of Alexandria, for example, to more deliberate destruction. So we might think here of fascism, the Nazis, and the suppression, I suppose, of material that we might see in totalitarian states. And the next two books from this category of the loss or preservation of books, they kind of go together, really. So there's this one, which is the book Smugglers of Timbuktu by Charlie English. And this is all about how when jihadists invaded Timbuktu in 2012, a team of librarians got together to preserve the rich cultural heritage of that city. And they spirited away some very rare manuscripts into hiding in order to preserve them. And Charlie English tells that story in this book. I'd never heard about this before until I saw this book in the bookshop and read the blurb, and I thought, wow, this sounds really fascinating. And a book on a similar theme is this one, and it's called Syria's Secret Library: The True Story of How a Besieged Syrian Town Found Hope, by Mike Thomson. So this is about a town in Syria on the fringes of Damascus where a secret library was formed underneath the city. So just like the book Smugglers of Timbuktu, this is about the preservation of this cultural heritage, but there's also this focus on the hope that reading and the books can bring to people in times of real difficulty as well. So this is another book that I'm really excited to read this one. The next two books are from a category that I think is more of a celebration of books or a celebration of collecting books, I guess, if you like. So the first is this one. It's called The Library by Stuart Kells. I'm going to read the blurb from this because it's quite short. From libraries without books, like the songlines of the first Australians, to the Library of Alexandria, the Bodleian, the Folger, and even the fabled libraries of Middle-earth and Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, Stuart Kells unlocks the bookish places that continue to capture our imaginations. This is like just the perfect book for me. I work for libraries. I'm not a librarian, I do data analysis, but I work for libraries. I love visiting libraries as much as I love visiting bookstores. So to read about libraries of all different kind, even imagined libraries, this is such a fascinating topic to me. Like all the books I've talked about today, I'm excited to read this, but I'm particularly excited to read Stuart Kells' book. The other book from this category about the celebration of collecting, if you like, is this one, which is another one I think with a lovely cover. It's actually in hardback. It's called Rare Books Uncovered: True Stories of Fantastic Finds in Unlikely Places. And this is by Rebecca Reggio Barry. And again, I'll go with the blurb on this. Few collectors are as dogged in pursuit of their quarry as collectors of antiquarian books. In Rare Books Uncovered, Rebecca Reggio Barry recounts extraordinary discoveries from the world of book collecting. Again, as much as I'm looking forward to reading about libraries, reading about rare books as well. It's a topic that's dear to my heart. I did part of a traineeship in working in archives. In the end, I decided that it wasn't for me, but as part of that traineeship, they took us on tours where we saw lots of rare books, lots of rare material. So they took us on like a backroom tour of the National Archives in Kew Gardens, which is a marvellous place. But they also took us on a very unique tour of the Victoria and Albert Museum, the V&A in London, where we saw some really rare books that they keep there. And then we also went on a tour of Durham Cathedral, and we got to see some material from the Durham Cathedral archives, which again was fascinating. There's one last book I wanted to talk about which didn't really fit in with any of these categories, but I have a copy and it's a cool sounding book. It's quite short. It's called Codex in Crisis by Anthony Grafton. As you can see, it's really short and it's quite a cool looking book. Actually, if I go to the back, this was published by the Crumpled Press, and it was hand bound, and they put on this on the back with the person who bound the book signs it, and you see the copy number. So it's just a really cool sort of item. Anthony Grafton is an academic, and he wrote an essay, and I think was it the New Yorker magazine, and then this book is more of a lengthier treatment of what he was discussing in that essay, which is about the idea of the book in the digital age, really, and how the idea, I guess, of the book as an object, or the act of reading the physical book, I suppose, has become problematized in the age of the digital age that we're in. What particularly fascinates me about Codex in Crisis is that it was published in 2008. It was written at a particular moment in time in the history of the internet where the web, even back then in 2008, is not what the web is today. There was an interesting discussion of this in a podcast I listened to recently, and I'll put a link to that in the description box down below, where the interviewer was speaking to the CEO of the, I think it's the Wikimedia Foundation or the Wiki Foundation. It's the non-profit foundation which essentially funds Wikipedia. The interviewer was talking about the changes that he's observed in the internet, how it started off as a very kind of utopian, non-commercial enterprise, became commercialized during the dot-com boom, that all crashed, and then it went through another phase of utopianism, and that's when Wikipedia emerged in the very early 2000s, and then became commercialized again and became the entity that it is today, which is where it's dominated by a very small number of players, Google and Facebook, for example, where the driving motive for those companies, no matter what they say, the driving motive is profit. This book was published in 2008, which is an interesting moment in the internet where that second wave of utopianism and collectivism was giving way to the current era of profiteering and the exploitation of user data. So I'm really interested to read what Anthony Grafton had to say about the book, the Codex, at that particular moment in time. I think that's really interesting. So there you go. That's just a handful of books about books. I've actually put together a Goodreads list, and I'll link that as well down below if you're interested. And I actually have over 100. I think I have about 130 books about books in that list. If you want to read any more, if you have suggestions about books that are not in that list, let me know, and I will add them to that list, because I think it's a really cool thing to compile into one list. If you have read any of the books I talked about today, let me know what you thought about them. So this was a very meta booktube video, books about books, or video about books about books. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel, and as always, I'll see you guys very soon. Bye.